Do we got it? Hey there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it might be where you are out there. Welcome back to the live stream. My name is Jeff Fritz, and today is January 4th, 2021. We're going to learn a little bit about C# with CSharpFritz today. How you doing there, chat room? How's it going over there? Let me say hello. There's the chat room right there. Got a bunch of friends that have wandered in already. Robert Tables is here. Chris Jones, hello. Aztec Consulting. Leah Bite, good to see you. Nefarious Bread, howdy to you. 5-minute coding, good morning, good evening. Is that Faye Noir, 85, hello. Frackberg is here and is saying we should be discussing IPAs instead of APIs. I think you have that slightly backwards. It's not quite that way. We'll talk more about that. I do have a nice cup of coffee from a Seattle-based coffee company. How we doing there? Robert Dino is here. Let me see. Who else do we have visiting us here today? Nope, the music's not laggy. Try stopping and restarting. S4P0, hello. Let me see. Excellent Dragon, good to see you. Jason Bach is here. CTI Geek. Janesco is here. Mastermind, so good to see you. Another one of our friends from the Live Coders team. Hello. Good morning to you, Fever AM. Fever AM. Yeah, there we go. Jonas RC86. Nope, didn't cancel. Nope, that was an old tweet. We're on, we're live. How's it going? My name's Jeff. We're here, we're live. Yeah, and we're going to be talking about APIs with ASP.NET Core. This is a continuing series of beginner-friendly streams where we're talking about getting started and answering your questions. This is more of an AMA-friendly set of streams, and of course, these are all being recorded and made available on the .NET YouTube channel for you to grab, download, and follow along with the various samples that we have and ask questions along the way. We've been paying very close attention to the comments that are out there on the YouTube channel so we can respond to those. And of course, if you tune in live, whether it's here on Twitch or over there on Microsoft Learn TV, you're going to be able to see and learn and ask questions about all the stuff that we're talking about here live on stream. And that's really the benefit that you want as part of this. You can get the material from over on some reference websites, some blogs. You can read the Microsoft.NET blogs. But this is your chance to ask somebody who teaches this stuff for a living and get the answers you need, get the direction you need in order to succeed with ASP.NET, with C#, with .NET 5. Whether you're deploying to Azure or somebody else's cloud, your own hosting providers, or hosting services internally. We're going to get you covered. We're going to get you the answers you need, and I hope you're having a great start to your 2021. Let me see. I see a couple more folks wandering here. Is that Shark? Good afternoon to you. Jose Marino. No, we're not talking about IPA beer. No, API. Got that a little backwards. Coffee and code APIs. IPAs, and we don't do that here on Visual Studio channel. Sorry about that. Aztec tweeted out the stream. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Hello there to you, No Flaws in DC. And we got DCube9 from Italy. Welcome in. Go ahead. We haven't done this in a while. Can we? We've been offline for a few weeks for the holiday break, the winter holiday here in the States. Where's everybody watching from? Go ahead and sound off. Let's see some of the locations pop up here from the chat room. Thindoll, let me pin that question and I will come back to you in just a minute. Not a problem to answer that. Norway is where Shark is. Minnesota for Jason Bach. Virginia, Ireland, Sweden, New Jersey, Ukraine. Woody, oh my goodness. I think Woody's winning the distance here. Germany for 5-minute coding. The Netherlands, Ohio, Mexico City for, is that Osopla? Oh boy, I'm going to get this wrong. Ocelopan. Coffee Land is where Janesco is. Coffee Land? Colombia? Georgia? Dallas, Fort Worth. Nice. Apricot in the Ukraine as well. Nice. Cuba Kid. Is that Cuba Kid? Is that how you pronounce that? In New Jersey. All right, there we go. My part of the world. Very nice. Erin Dawson. in the great state of Pennsylvania. Brazil, S4P0 is leading in the southern direction from me here in North America. Very nice. Dominican Republic. Oh my goodness. Norfolk in the UK. Finland and drinking 12 kilograms of coffee a year. Oh my goodness. Let's get into this. Let's talk about APIs with ASP.NET. I want this to be very beginner-friendly discussion. Folks in the chat room, of course, you're welcome. You're encouraged to answer questions and help each other out as we're going along here. I have featured chat wired up here. Nefarious from Chile, look at that. And Jose from Madrid. Nice. So, I'm happy to answer your questions. If there are things that are a little bit further along or too specific, I may decline them. Not that I don't want to answer your questions, but I don't want to intimidate folks who might be a little bit more beginner and concerned about asking what may seem like too simple a question. No question is too simple. No question is too basic for this, but there may be some overly specific things that get just a little bit further down the road that I may decline to answer, just so we can make sure that those folks who are new to the channel, who are new to the topic, are able to get their questions answered. And like I said, they don't feel intimidated. I'm going to get some music playing here in the background. This is Stream Beats from our friend Harris Heller. This is music that's designed for you to stream on your Twitch, YouTube, whatever channel you may be broadcasting on. It's royalty-free, free for you to use. And this is the lo-fi playlist that we're going to have playing in the background. So we got a little bit of groovy music hanging out there that kind of fills the empty spaces and keeps us going and feeling good. Thank you so much, Harris. We appreciate you sharing this playlist for us to use. Best of luck to you in 2021 and the success with Stream Beats. Thank you so much for letting us listen to this music. Am I building APIs or consuming? We're going to be building APIs today, Tommy. That's a good question. We're going to build APIs today. Maybe we'll show a little bit about consuming in the next... let me pin that for the next episode, because I'm going to talk about the basics of building APIs with ASP.NET Core and .NET 5, even a little C# 9 today. And next time I want to get into OpenAPI and gRPC, which are a little bit more specific around how you build APIs, and as far as protocols, how you communicate to servers, and we'll make sure that we cover how to consume, particularly with gRPC. That's an interesting topic, and we'll cover that next time. There's an official Twitch playlist on Spotify, a bit more up-tempo. Yeah, there is. I don't mind broadcasting these. These episodes are once a week on Monday mornings, 9 a.m. Eastern. Every week you'll find them. And I've actually got a blog post queued up where I'm going to talk about, well, here's what we did with the first 12 episodes focusing on C#. Here's what we're going to do for the rest of the ASP.NET series, and announce... It looks like we want to do Blazor as the next topic, and we'll probably start Blazor, I want to say in March. And it's going to be a little bit tricky because we're going to run right into the spring conference season for Microsoft. We have a Microsoft Ignite event this spring. We have a Microsoft MVP Summit. We have a Microsoft Build this spring. There's other conferences and things in there too. So, oh my gosh, so much going on in the next 3 to 6 months, and we're gonna be here every Monday morning, unless there's another conference that kind of pushes us out of our time slot. We'll be right here this same time every Monday. So I'm gonna have to wear the Blazor blazer for that series. We'll see. It gets a little bit warm wearing that. Am I going to cover the code first version of gRPC? Code first version. Yeah. More focused.NET Confs, those will be coming up as well. We've got a couple of those planned. We've got a couple other ideas on the burner here for 2021. Let me come back to this question from Thindoll before I get into the code. Let me pop this question back up on the screen. I heard it, but it didn't show up. Yeah, there it is. How would you suggest doing authorization for APIs? We've been looking at B2C, Auth0, and a few others. Any tips? Authorization for APIs is something that I think, unfortunately, isn't covered very well by a lot of the documentation that you see out there, a lot of the samples. I'm purposely saving up authorization and authentication for a little bit later in the series and cover it across the entire gamut of whether it's Razor Pages, MVC, SignalR, Blazor, APIs. B2C, Auth0 all work very well. They're great services. Azure Active Directory works very nicely for that as well. But you need to dial it in so that you send and exchange your tokens appropriately as you're interacting with APIs. So you can use any of these plugins with ASP.NET Core, with other programming languages and frameworks as well. And they all work very nicely. No real tips. I think they're all Auth0, Okta, they make a great product as well. Very good options for you to choose. I don't have a specific recommendation of one over another, but they're definitely very good that you can choose out there. And if you've already got Active Directory wired up, using Azure Active Directory will work very nicely for you, along with an identity server will wire that up and give you a very nice experience for building authentication and authorization into your APIs. OIDC would be really great to cover. I'm going to try and recruit some folks from our security group to come in and help us with some of those topics. Taking a look here, identity server would be nice. Yeah. Excellent Dragon asks, in a nutshell, I'm going to put that up so we get the marker here. In a nutshell, what's dependency injection? We covered this. We had an episode on it, and you can find this out on the YouTube channel. We've got I believe there's a notebook on that, and some source code in the GitHub repository, !GitHub in the chat. If you're here on Twitch, if you're over there on YouTube watching the recording, check the links just below here in the description for a link to the GitHub repository, and you'll see their sample code about dependency injection there. But in a nutshell, the 30-second pitch about dependency injection, real easy. It's a way for you to structure your objects, your classes, structs, so that you can insert into them at construction time or later with properties. You can inject the dependencies, the other objects that they depend on. We saw with MVC controllers, a controller may depend on a repository. Well, a repository, a data access, if it depends on it, we should inject that, insert it at the constructor when our controller is created. That way it's always there and available for us. So, in a nutshell, it's how you provide those dependencies for another object to rely on. Now, there's ancillary technologies that folks confuse and get wired into this architecture consideration. Things like service location, containers, and mix those in. You don't need those to do dependency injection. It's something that a lot of folks in .NET prefer to use because it makes that easier. It makes injecting the correct dependency easier. You configure that in one place, and then you end up just requesting it inside your constructor. Oh, I need my contact repository. Boom. It's made available to you, and you don't even have to think about where it comes from, how it's created. It's just injected into your class. More about that in the dependency injection video earlier in the C# with CSharpFritz playlist over there on the YouTube. I believe, is there a command? Do I have a command for the playlist? Let me double check that real quick to get you over there. I can't remember. Just going to check that real quick, and I'll start talking about today's session and get in and showing some samples and talking through this. Yeah, ! YouTube will get you right into the playlist for the C# with CSharpFritz series, and I think there's 14, 15 episodes out there. that you can check out and get into. Tremendous. Each one's about 2 hours long, and scrub through that. Fast forward. All the questions that folks asked during the session are linked, so you can click through and get right to the answers to your favorite questions. Magic is happening. Magic is happening. If there's a budget to give you an additional toy to double all resources, why not take it? We call that Azure. If you need to double resources, just grab the little slider and slide it over to 2 servers. Slide it over from 50 meg of storage to 100 meg. Just drag that across. No, you don't have to wait for things to be shipped to your office and rack and install new hard drives and memory and whatnot. Just drag the slider across. Done. It's all good. Let me see. I'm going to pin this question here from SP40 about background tasks. Hello there, Mr. Joe B. Good to see you. Resource injection. Yes. Yes. What's the PowerShell tip of the week? We're not talking about PowerShell today. Sorry about that. We're in C# and ASP.NET. We have this question from S4P0 asking, have I implemented any background tasks with hosted services using Web API? So when you're building with ASP.NET Core, and this isn't something that I currently have planned, I'm going to drop an issue out here to talk about background hosted services. I've implemented this a number of times over on my channel, but what you can do is you can, future show idea, there we go. You can create services background tasks that run behind the scenes as your APIs are serving requests to people visiting your web server. In this way, whatever background processing that you might have to do can take place in the same process on a different thread, so it doesn't interrupt the normal requests that folks are making to your API. Maybe folks are uploading an image and you want to turn it into a thumbnail. You want to resize it. That's a good example of a hosted service, a hosted task that when it sees that image uploaded, right, put a message into a queue in memory, and it gets picked up, compress that image, save it out to disk, and now it can be served. That's easy to do. There's absolutely ways that you can do this, and I encourage you to stick around. I will plan a background hosted services segment of a future stream. More on that over on the GitHub channel, GitHub repository, as I get through and start planning more of these out. How do I feel about the Dell Inspiron 5590? That's a little bit off topic. I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm more than happy to talk about those questions over on my stream, twitch.tv/CSharpFritz. I want to stay focused on ASP.NET Core and Visual Studio today. Hey, Jason, good to see you. Hey, PC Nerd, hello. Let me take a look here. Timer jobs in .NET 5. Are you thinking about Azure Functions and timer triggers? You use VS Code on Linux? Actually, Tommy, you're not an outcast. I wrote most of the samples that we're going to look at today on my Linux laptop. I have an Ubuntu laptop that I've configured, and I run tmux with Git on one side in one panel, and I have .NET running in another panel, constantly rebuilding as I make changes. Visual Studio Code on another in another workspace, so I just flip back and forth between my tmux filled terminal and edit. So works very nicely. Hey Sean, good to see you. Rambly Geek, yes, we are working on .NET 5. Not teaching Visual Studio from basics, teaching, check out the title just below, we're teaching about APIs and ASP.NET Core. Let me get into and show you the samples, get over to the GitHub repository, and we can talk a little bit further about today's session. Let me head over to the code. It's right over here. Here it comes. I know. Wait, where'd that code? There it is. Bang! There's the GitHub repository. GitHub.com/CSharpFritz/C# with CSharpFritz. Head out there. !GitHub if you're in the Twitch channel. Like I said, Link is just down below if you're watching on YouTube, and you can get here all of the samples. There's Jupyter notebooks for all the code from our Intro to C# series that we kicked off this stream series with. You can head over there and learn more and interact with all of those samples. Today's samples are up here. I haven't written any prose to go with them yet. I put a couple links and an agenda in the README, but they will appear in the sessions under Season 2. You'll see a Session 4 appear there. There's nothing too much there right now as we're recording, but it'll be filled out with all the samples that we're looking at before the recording goes live over there on YouTube. So, hey, Bob Treehouse, enjoy the Blazor vids. Nice. And you're feeling more comfortable with validation in ASP.NET Core. That's great. A couple folks talking about Windows Subsystem for Linux. Awesome. That's great. Let me get into and talk about what we have when we think about when we start building with ASP.NET Core with the APIs that are available for us. So let me move this over here. I'm going to open the appropriate folder for our samples because for some reason I didn't ahead of time. It is here. There we go. So when you build with ASP.NET Core, there's a series of templates that are available to you. And it's when you first look at it, it's kind of daunting, right? There's a ton here when you execute .NET New or you're in Visual Studio, whether it's Visual Studio for Mac or Visual Studio 2019. There's a lot of templates here. In particular today, we're going to focus on, where is it? This one, the Web API template right there. This is designed, it's built for you to be able to create a service, a web-based service that responds to typically machine-to-machine requests. We're not going to be building user interface that's intended to be presented in a web browser or somewhere else. This is designed so that you're going to be delivering some data, or you're going to be receiving some data, some information, a command, an instruction for you to process on the server, go do something with. But for the purposes of simplicity today, I'm going to show a little bit of just fetching and presenting data, or pushing data to the server. You may, like I said with the earlier example I mentioned, you may be building some of these to handle the upload of an image, create a thumbnail, and make that available as somebody's profile picture on a social media website, or in your accounting site, so you know who the various folks are in your organization that are working on accounting tasks, whatever it might be. We're going to focus on these today. All right. Triangle West. These are Gunner glasses that I'm wearing. You can find out more about Gunner at gunnar.com, gunnar.com. There's a link over on my stream for more information and a coupon code there as well if you're interested. Let me see here. TMKK, before I get too far into this, because this looks like .NET Core, asks a question. Well, what's the difference between .NET Core and .NET Framework? This is a question we get a lot. .NET Framework is the runtime that shipped with Windows, is part of Windows, and is in every version of Windows since Windows XP, and will continue to be in Windows 10 and other versions of Windows going forward. It runs only on Windows, and if you're going to build anything to run with .NET Framework, you need to use Visual Studio 2019, 2017, 2015, 2013, 2012, 2010, 2008, 2005, 2003, etc., etc., etc. .NET Core is the new version that they started building and working on back in 2013, 2014, 2015 we saw our first real release that is completely open source, runs on Windows, Mac, or Linux, You can build with whatever editor you'd like, whether it's Visual Studio 2019, Visual Studio Code, Vim, Emacs, Sublime, whatever editor you want, you can build with, and is designed to provide your developer interactions at the command line first. So that's what .NET Core is. So .NET Framework, you need the compiler that comes with a Visual Studio. .NET Core, you're all good at the command line and you can work freely there. So thank you for the question. Appreciate it. So this is the template that we're going to talk about, and we're going to tinker around to start here. When you run .NET New Web API, you end up with, well, I'm going to use Visual Studio Code to talk about and wander around these projects so that I don't get too lost in some of the API features. And I think this is something that folks can see and appreciate works the same on Windows, Mac, and Linux. I want to make sure that folks understand that even though I'm on Windows, all of these features that I'm talking about work exactly the same regardless of the operating system you're on. So, the first one I'm going to talk about, I have in this one bare template. This is what happens when you say File New Web API. You get this project here, and we mentioned there's always in ASP.NET Core, there's always a program class, because ASP.NET Core projects, they're a console application. It works everywhere, so console applications are the lowest common denominator for building a web application. So, public static void main, you're used to seeing that in console applications, and it looks very similar if you're in Java as well. Create our web host builder, and this is identical to all of our other ASP.NET projects. Nothing different here, okay? When we get into our startup file, it starts to look a little bit different, right? I'm going to collapse up the using statements. Configuration is configuration. But now in our configure services, now it looks different. Now it looks like we're doing a little bit more here. Let me put a little bit of a wrap on this so we can see what's going on there. There we go. So we add controllers. Notice it's not adding controllers in views. It just adds controllers, because in Web API, in ASP.NET Core APIs, we only have controllers. We're not adding those views, those things, those templates to format and generate HTML. Just controllers. We're just working with data, pushing and delivering data to our visitors. And there's a new piece that was added here in .NET 5, add Swagger Gen. This is part of the default template now, and it sets up Swagger for open API information. And I'm going to dig further into what you can do with Swagger, with open API and gRPC next time, but know that this is now part of the default API project that's available for you. There's a question here. After .NET 5, do we need to describe ASP.NET Core API, or do we just say ASP.NET API? It's ASP.NET Core API. They are not dropping the core name from ASP.NET. We need to be able to differentiate between ASP.NET on .NET Framework and ASP.NET Core going forward. So, you built websites with transistors and wires. So the services are a little bit different, and we'll see how that impacts our application going forward here. In configure, we now have app use Swagger and use Swagger UI being added when we're in development mode. It's not in the rest of our application, but it is here for development so that we can test and explore our API in a user interface that isn't just a bare browser, right? Nobody likes to start up a browser and have nothing in it and kind of be facing that blank sheet of paper problem. How do I get started? What do I do next? Well, I'm going to show you here. It gets us right into being able to interact with our APIs. And the only endpoint we have here is map controllers. Previously, we had other things to map excuse me, to map other endpoints, but just map controllers here. So there's more to this that we're going to be able to do, and with less configured here, it means a smaller footprint in memory. So, off topic, why don't I use the cool music theme from .NET Conf? I have the music here. I like to shake it up and try different things. So, yeah, we'll talk about Swagger versioning in the future. Yes, there's version information there, and we will talk about that next time. I don't want to get too far into Swagger. So, but this is for a little bit of documentation. You'll see next time. So this by default comes with the idea of we're going to publish information about weather forecasts, right? And weather forecasts is a pretty simple object structure that we can all relate to. For a given date, here's the temperature in Celsius, here's the temperature in Fahrenheit, and here's some summary: cloudy, windy, whatever. Our controller that's going to interact and show us our weather forecasts is here in the controllers folder, weather forecast controller, and it inherits from controller base. Now, controller base provides just the basic capabilities that a controller needs in order to interact with those 4 simple HTTP actions that we want to support: get, post, put, and delete. There's other HTTP actions, but those are the 4 most common ones, and folks will tell you that put and delete aren't used anywhere near as much as get and post. But this provides some helper methods that will get you there quicker, right, and make you more successful when you inherit from controller base. You can inherit from the controller class as well. Nothing wrong with that. Controller base is the minimum you need to get started. This, and I'll talk about the attributes here in a minute, but this class has a series of summaries just laid out here: freezing, bracing, chilly, cool, mild, blah, 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 blah. And all this does when you execute the get interaction, an HTTP get with this controller, is it returns a collection, an IEnumerable, right? An IEnumerable describes a forward-only collection of type weather forecast. And it's just randomly assigning some numbers here. Some numbers, some summary information. It's just randomly putting them together so that you have some data to explore and see how this works with. So that's not bad. This is the code that is generated from the .NET new command. That's right. Let me put that question up so I can make sure that it gets tagged. This is all code that comes with the .NET new command. I haven't touched this at all. This is the template that's delivered. I want to make sure that you see the features that are delivered, because I'm going to rip it down. I'm going to simplify this dramatically in the next 2 demos so that you see that, you know what, it generated a dozen files here: weather forecast controller, CS proj. There's a properties launch settings thing here, app settings, program startup, and weather forecast. There's a lot of stuff there. We're going to show you how we can simplify this in the next couple demos. So let's run this project and let me show you exactly what this looks like. So I'm going to drop into the command line here. I'm going to go into the one folder and I will just .NET run from here. Of course, .NET run, to recap, to bring us back, is going to restore any packages needed, compile, and run, and it's going to tell me it's hosting at HTTPS localhost 5001, and I believe, yep. So I will go to localhost 5001. There it is. And there's nothing there. And this is what I'm talking about, where the default for an API doesn't have anything. We saw that Swagger is installed here. So if I go to /Swagger as a developer in development mode, I get this user interface now that lets me explore and interact with my controller that I have configured. And it's even got a little bit of schema information there about my weather forecast object. And you can see my weather forecast has a date object that's actually a string. It's got a temperature in Celsius Fahrenheit, and there's the summary, and whether they're nullable or not. The blue light glasses, these are Gunnar glasses, Gunnar. View models, business logic. Yeah, I'm not going to get into architecture. We're talking just introducing how to work with APIs today. So this user interface ships with .NET. You don't do anything to build this, okay? This is just there for you, and it's got the name up here of my project. By default, it's configured like this. We'll learn more about configuring this next time. I can click through and actually interact with that get method on my weather forecast here, and I can click through and say, try this out. There's no parameters to submit, so it's going to run a curl command, right? Those of you that are familiar with running APIs on Linux or executing from the command line, you use a command called curl here. You specify the HTTP verb you want to use, get, the location you want to communicate with, and the MIME type, the content type that you want to accept, and it returns that data. And we get various dates here, temperatures, and summary, and this is all randomly generated. It's funny data. It's just here for you to be able to explore and confirm that it's working and delivering the content that you expect, okay? And I also look at this Swagger UI as a great way for you to document how your APIs work. And we can see our API accepts and works with these different media types. Text plain, application JSON, text JSON. Out of the box, these APIs work with these media types. And this is one of the key features of the ASP.NET Core API structure, is we know how to answer on a URL. And based on the accept header that's passed in, we will respond with an appropriately formatted data type if we know how to format to that. So JSON by default, and that was decided on by the community as this is the preferred way we'd like to interact with our data. JSON, the JavaScript object notation, is the way we would prefer to receive and work with this data. There are ways and there are other configuration options available. We'll see more about those later in the stream, about how you can change that so it'll handle XML, protocol buffers. We'll even look at a demo where we're going to look at vCards to return and interact with data. Now, this weather forecast folder structure here, where did that come from? We saw Swagger came from the registration in the startup. Let me go back over to Visual Studio Code. And I'm going to go up here to the header. This route attribute that we see here, well, we learned a little bit about routing last time when we talked about MVC. But this route header says this controller is going to handle requests that come in on this configured folder structure. Now, we're kind of cheating here. There's this bracket controller bracket wildcard that you can put in there that basically says, well, whatever the name of this controller is before the keyword controller, that is where we're going to listen. Okay, well, you know, that allows me then to, say, change this, and I can call this the foo controller. And if I stop and restart my project here, it's going to blow up on me. Because I changed something and forgot to reference it somewhere else. Right here. I forgot to change the constructor. Try that one more time. Down on line 21. That's constructor. Yeah. Try that one more time. And the type or namespace name, where is that? Line 21. Oh. I forgot to change the logger here. There we go. Right. So I changed the name of my controller, and right, I didn't have to change the route. Right. It's just an abstraction that's up there that now means when I refresh my Swagger index, now it knows foo. And when I execute, right, this went to localhost 5001/foo, and it still returned weather data. So I changed the name of my controller, and that may make sense for you. Maybe, right, you abstract, you add some other level to it. Maybe you had a product name in the name of your controller, and you want to move that somewhere else. Well, you can then either change the route here or use that wildcard, which just picks up the name of the class, right? I can change this back to weather forecast, put that into my route there, and when I refresh this, now it's the foo API, okay, but it's on /weather forecast. Foo is just the name of the controller that's being rendered that we're delivering from. So we have options for how we move around and name our APIs. Some folks like to put their APIs under an API top-level folder. Yeah. That way, it's a little bit clearer that this is a machine-to-machine interaction. So when I refresh, it's now /API/weather forecast. It's up to you. You can name these however you'd like. You can place these however you'd like. But you can... This is all up to you. These are all flexible features that you can build and work with. So that's a little bit with working with Swagger and how those controllers are configured to start. It only gives you this one get method. Just like we had in MVC, you can also have an HTTP post. Helps if I spell it right. And return some data or what have you here and define your interaction with a method. But it's easy to define those. We've seen how that works. It has exactly the same interactions. And notice we're returning an IEnumerable of type weather forecast, right? If there's some sort of an error in here... No. Hold that thought. Hold that thought. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. Because, yeah, we're going to come back to that in the fourth demo. Now, I mentioned... Let me get into the next demo. I mentioned that this is a lot of files. That's a lot of files you have to build. And for folks that are used to other frameworks, you wrote a lot of content just to get started there. You can work with something called middleware to build something simpler that responds and interacts without having to write all the controllers and things. If you just have some very simple things that you need to hand off. So if we build a bare web application, so let me go back and show you the templates. If I build an empty, is what it's called, an empty application, this one, it doesn't have any controllers or views or razor pages or even API controllers to start. It's empty. It's got just the same program file with the same contents we're used to seeing. And if we click into the startup, it doesn't have anything here except for this map get, right? Remember from our bare template in startup, it mapped controllers in our endpoints, right? This use endpoints method here defines and says, here's how we're going to interact with folks that connect to our web server. We're connecting controllers by default. Well, in our empty template, we're saying map get. And this is a little bit of middleware in ASP.NET Core. We're mapping a get action against / the root of the website. And I've I've changed this slightly here to make it a little bit more interesting. I've set the content type to application JSON, and I'm writing asynchronously out a little bit of JSON that I formatted. All right, curly brace, hello, colon, world, end brace. And that's really the simplest interaction and endpoint that you could deliver here. So if I drop down into that sample, run this, there is no swagger. This is as simple as it gets. And when I go to this website, I get just hello world. It's JSON data. Okay, there it is. My response, I can even look at the headers here and you'll see the response headers. It's application JSON over here. All right, let me zoom in the developer tools. We're going to be using them a bit today. Application JSON that was delivered, and it's formatted for us over here. No big deal. But I've gotten this now simpler so that for those basic APIs that I may want to build, now I've got app settings, and I don't even need app settings really. My CSproj program and startup. There's a launch settings over here as well. That's not bad, right? And we can set up all kinds of mappings here to go and do all kinds of interesting things. What if we want to go even simpler? There's even more simplification we can do here. And I'm digging into this just to show you that you don't need controllers to do all of these things. You can really make this even simpler. In this case, I only wrote 2 files. I wrote a CSproj file, which specifies that this is a web project, SDK web. We're outputting an exe in .NET 5. I deleted all the other files. The program routes, we're going to see, that's a second part to this demo that I created. But I wrote a program CS, and now I'm taking advantage of what we learned in our C# 9 session, and I'm writing a top-level program here. Top-level program means I don't need any classes. I don't need anything wrapping and saying, here's your program entry point. I've taken what was in the startup class over here, this configure and use routing, use endpoints, and a little bit of this create host builder. I've simplified this even further, so it's really just web host, create the default web host, create the default web builder, configure it, run the application, and when I get a request, doesn't matter where, I didn't even map a get, it's just when I get a request, return application JSON, and I'm going to say hello from C# 9. Doesn't matter where the URL is. Let me go to that, run this project. And what I'm showing here is you don't have to write a lot of code now to build an API. If you want to build an API that is as simple as possible, as small as possible, put it into a Docker container to do just the very basic little interactions. Or maybe you've got some business logic sitting in a library that you want to hand off to. You can write a very simple front end to this that handles those few requests. Hand off to some other API, hand off to some other business logic that you've written and is sitting inside of a package. Somewhere else that you're reusing for user interface somewhere else. But you can build this as simple as possible. Exactly, SP40, I'm going to bring that up here. The idea here is exactly that. This looks like a simple Express.js template. It looks like a Node template for building an API. And that's absolutely one of the goals here was let's get rid of all the ceremony around building an application. We learned about these top-level programs with C# 9, but now, I mean, 12 lines of code, and really it's only 6 because I've got these 4 using statements at the top that I don't really need there. I could be very explicit in the various objects that I'm using here, but the idea was make this as simple as possible. And now if I go to my localhost 5001 and request that, now I get hello from C# 9. It is application JSON that I've been returning. It's very simple type that I've returned, and it doesn't matter where I go here, I'm always getting that same content. Now, that seems a little bit too simple, right? Who cares? I'm not really doing anything with that. But maybe you've got some sort of informational endpoint that you need to interact with. You want to hand things off and do some work and have your API be your API facade around your business logic. Make that as small as possible, because maybe you want to put it in Docker. You want to put it in a container, make it very small, easy to ship, other folks to be able to install, consume, and work with that container with very low ceremony. Well, we can do that. We can take and start building a little bit of logic around this. Let me cancel that. So I'm going to comment this out because let me show you the other sample that I wrote here. Oh no, what did I do? Did I delete that? No, I collapsed it. So now I'm going to take that same create default builder and I'm going to start bringing in that map get that I saw. So if you go to the root map get to slash, I'm going to return application JSON and say hello from routes, because now I'm going to start to build a little bit of a route table. I'm going to start to give a little bit of logic for where I want these to respond, where I want these to interact. Nothing says you couldn't take this and turn it into an extension method and hide it in a package that you build somewhere else and make this extremely simple. So it's just the app.use configuration or whatever method you create. I've got another one here, map get, and I'm going to receive inside these curly braces. We saw curly braces with routes is a way for us to define a wildcard, something we want to capture. So we're going to capture name, all right? And we're going to take a look inside of something called data at contacts. We're going to look for a person record, and if we find a person that has that name, if we don't find that person, we're going to return a 404, a file not found. If we do find that, well, let's write out as JSON whoever that person is. I wrote a little bit of data down here using a C#9 record type. It has a first and a last name. And I put together a simple list of contacts that has 3 people. Jeff Fritz, Mary Contrary, Joe Bago Donuts. He goes by Joseph. He's an Irish fella. And he has a thing for breakfast pastry. So, very simple, that is going to be able to go through and now query and interact with these various, this API. I didn't save that. Rats. Do it again. Do that again. After I uncommented it. There we go. So now if I refresh /foo, well, file not found. Right? I get a 404 coming back from that. If I delete and go right to the root, hello from routes. If I go to /Jeff, I get, there's my person. So now I'm starting to build a little bit of logic. It's still one file with my CS project, but I'm able to compile and move that around very easily. Like I said, you can reference other NuGet packages so that you can pull that together, hide your business logic somewhere else, because you're going to reuse it in a desktop application, in a Xamarin mobile application, maybe in a full website, maybe even embedded in a Blazor application. Totally cool. But you can reference it now from these very small API projects to build and deliver content, deliver value, put into a Docker container without a ton of ceremony. Makes it very easy to be productive in how you share and reuse content and you want to expose as an API. So let me head back over now and let's talk a little bit further. I'm keeping an eye on questions here. Let's stay on topic there, Riley. So those are the simple ways. If you really want to rip down and build write the minimum amount of code to deliver an API you can do those things. You can build these very small projects, and you can find this sample code out on the GitHub repository, !GitHub, to grab that link, or the link is in the description just below if you're watching on YouTube. Now, let's actually talk about the objects that were being returned. Our weather forecast returned an IEnumerable of type weather forecast. And that's not exactly. It's not exactly. What's the word I'm looking for? It's not being a good internet citizen to just return a weather forecast. There's more that we should include in our API, in our method definition, so that we can deliver, I don't want to say value, but so that we can make it clearer the results of our interaction. So what we can do, instead of returning just that bare type, and there's nothing wrong with this, we can do better. We can be more responsible with our communications with the visitors to our APIs. So let me move over here into the fourth sample, return objects. Now, I still have weather forecast in this one. My startup is still the same as it was in the first project that we were looking at. But if I drop into controllers here, I'm going to talk a little bit about this API controller and what this means, and this return type here. Let's change this up a little bit. Let's dig in a little bit further here. The API controller attribute provides a lot of value for you because it's telling ASP.NET Core that there's other things you should do around the interactions with these methods to be a good citizen. Because it's up there, if there's some sort of an error that happens down here, throw new exception. Oops, Fritz made a typo. So you look at that, I can't even spell typo, right? Put that into there, and let me go into this, run that. That's starting up, there it goes. Yeah, unreachable code, I know, I made it that way. And I drop into that Swagger definition, that's really zoomed in. Thank you. If I try to execute my weather forecast now, try it out, execute, I get this ugly response that comes back. Right, it threw an exception, and it's expecting to receive a 200, but I got a 500 undocumented error. Right, it's an error that says, you had a problem here on the server. That's not cool. That's a problem that isn't communicating very well, that we didn't deliver our content properly. So we can do better. If instead of returning that enumerable type, if we change this to an action result, okay, this is putting a little bit of a wrapper around the object to say that we're providing some HTTP status information. We're providing some additional information that web clients expect to hear around this, and we're going to be able to behave better when we interact with this. So now if I do the get, try it out, execute, that isn't the error that I expected to get. I expected to get the automatic error formatting, and it didn't do it for me. Why am I not getting it? I know I get it from when I get the validation in here, but why am I not seeing it? It should have given me a automatic 400 response, and it's doing that for model state. There's what you should be doing instead of throwing an exception, right? what you should be doing is, instead of returning just plain action result, right, if there is an error, return new bad request, and you can actually pass bad request object result. There we go. You can pass the error in it, and it'll format nicely for you. So if you wrap your try catches around the various business logic that you have here, we refresh. Now I get error, and it returns a nicely formatted standard response object that I can see. Oh, wait a sec, there's the message. There was no inner exception for this because I just threw the exception, right? But now I can take this and I can go look up in a log somewhere, well, what does that mean? What happened here? So that I can triage appropriately. So you could write some error middleware, absolutely, to take care of that. Yes. There are many ways to return a response, and this is where, right, writing software is more like an art. You have different ways to do this. Which one works best for you? What the APIs in ASP.NET Core are trying to provide is a way for you to provide standard information. Because I returned a bad request object result, it gave me a 400 error code, not the 500. It's a 400 error code, and it formatted my response nicely, so it wasn't just an ugly stack trace. It's formatted appropriately, and I can see clearly that something went wrong. If I go back over here, and if I still leave it with returning enumerable range, and I rerun it, that's still okay. This will still run because this enumerable range, it's actually going to turn into an OK result. So when I execute, now I get a 200 OK, and I still get my response body. And it appropriately has the information that I need for HTTP clients to interact and get the appropriate, make the appropriate decisions with their code that they need. Guacamole asks a question here. Let me put this up. What's the difference between returning IActionResult versus an action result? If you return IActionResult here, it won't let you specify the generic for the type that we're expecting to return. Right? By making it an action result, I can specify generically, right, inside the angle brackets here, I can specify here's the type of object that we're going to return. This way, our documentation, and we'll see with Swagger next time, that it will take that information and use that to format data about the request. So, right, if I take a look at what the documentation here in Swagger says, let me just scroll down. It says the example value, and it's showing an array of date types. Weather forecast types that it's returning. I can even see schema here, and it shows it's an array of weather forecasts. I can click in and see it's a collection of weather forecast objects that it's returning. So I now have, right, I have a way by specifying that generic action result that I'm communicating to the framework, and I'm communicating to the clients, this is the type that I'm returning. Because if I didn't return, right, if I returned something else, right, maybe instead I returned, right, hello world, I'm going to get a compiler error. That's not what you said you were going to return. You told me you were going to return an action result with a collection of weather forecasts. So the compiler now helps me. If I make it just IActionResult, well, you're returning something. I don't know what, but you're returning something, right? And returning hello world, that's okay. You can do that, right? And this down here is saying, what don't you like? Right now it's saying, well, you need to wrap this. I don't know what that is. So if I say okay, it formats that, and even then, cancel this, rerun. Oh, I forgot to wrap this with okay. Come here. Rerun that. That's right, 2 returns. It's going to ignore the second one. I'm Windows tab crazy from my Linux machine that I was working on. So now if I do a get on weather forecast, no parameters, and it doesn't know anything about the response type because I haven't documented it. I haven't specified what's being returned. So it's kind of like it's kind of like a grab bag here. You don't know what you're going to get. This API is like a box of chocolates. At least that's what Forrest Gump told me. So, is that really what you want? Or, right, you can be a little bit more explicit about this and specify the... Where is it? The type a little bit clearer. And now our clients know exactly what they're getting. Right. So it's good to have that definition that you can work with. I don't have the error JSON template neither. I don't yet. Like I said, we'll get into Swagger next time, and we'll see how you can provide that additional documentation about, well, here's what you can be interacting with. That's right, Pac-Man Jr. You know it. APIs are like a box of chocolates. You never know what data you're going to get. You don't want that. We should be a little bit clearer when we interact with things. It's my preference for strongly typed data and APIs and interactions. When I interact with a weather forecast API, I expect to get weather forecast objects, not other things. So there are ways to provide those other schemas. Oh yes. And I'm taking mental notes here. We're going to get into all of that with Swagger next time, and gRPC as well. We'll get way into gRPC next time, because with .NET 5, the work that's been done on gRPC makes C# and .NET 5 the premier way, the most performant way to build gRPC APIs by all of the performance tests that are being performed by a third-party vendor. .NET 5 is the fastest to interact with. So let me head back over to the code. This is great, returning data of that format and kind of specifying and forcing it. But let's start pushing some data back to our APIs. Let's get a little bit further than returning this content. Let's get a little bit deeper beyond returning that content and talk about actually sending the content into the API. Because, right, I mean, it's one thing to just go and get data, but let's go to the next demo and actually do some model binding. Now, model binding is how we interact with our APIs, our controllers, so that it takes whatever parameters that are being passed into us and bind those to either, to parameters that we can interact with, take them directly into a programmatic object that I expect as a developer working with this code. In my startup, I haven't changed anything. It's the exact same code. It's what comes with the default file .NET New Web API. That's the same. But what I'm doing for this one is I'm going to write a contact object. So I have a contact controller, and I've built a contact object here. I wanted to make a contact record, but there's a little bit of features here that I wanted to add And we're going to build this with a class instead. So, nope, not behind Rust. It's even faster. So I've got this object for a contact. Contact has an ID, a first name, a last name, and an age. And I'm going to put a attribute on the age. And I'm going to specify, you know what? We're only going to take folks between ages of 3 and 30. We're looking for some younger folks to interact with this API. So scrolling down, I have a contact controller. It's got the API controller on it and a route. Now, API controller, besides helping format and process some of the data, also provides model binding capabilities and model binding inspection capabilities without you having to write anything. Check this out. So I have my get contacts method that's just a get, and it's going to return the entire collection of contacts. And there's my 3 people. Joe Bago Donuts, he's 31. Mary Contreras, she's 28. And Jeff Fritz, of course, he's 25. Anyways, and you can request one of those by ID, and I'll just go and grab one by default, first or default, and return them. And it's returning a contact object and returning an IEnumerable of type contact. Really, I could change this to an action result to make sure that it returns properly. So when I run this sample, running, building, there it goes. Let me refresh here. So now my Swagger API has 3 methods that we can interact with, because down here I also added post, right? So I have a post that will add, right? A post doesn't add interaction. There's also put, which does an update interaction, but we're going to add a contact. We're specifying with this attribute that our contact is coming from the body of our HTTP message. And I've dummied this up because it's an in-memory list. Go find the maximum ID, add 1, add it to the collection of contacts, and return an OK. So I've got these 3 methods that are inside of my controller. And if I execute get on contact, you notice there's also get contact ID. It sees that template for us. But if I specify get contact, execute this, I get my 3 contacts being returned. And I just went to localhost contact, right? If I go there directly, right, I get those 3 pieces of data in JSON format. But right, I've got the data here. That's nice. And I can also test down here get contact with the ID, and this is required. If I say we'll try this out and go get me contact 1, so it's actually navigating to contact /1, and I get, well, there's Jeff Fritz, age 25. It was a 200 success. Well, what if I try to access contact 4, right? Trying to access that, I get a 204 undocumented, and there's nothing there. I should return a 404 not found. You found somebody that isn't here, so I can make this better, right? And have this return action result contact. And I can move this up here. And I can say, right, if out contact equals no, return not found. Otherwise, we're going to return out contact, right? And it's got that matching up appropriately for me to know that those are both okay to interact with. That's right, Jeff is 25. So by returning the appropriate HTTP code there, right? Try this out. And if I try to return for person 4, I get a 404 undocumented, and I get an appropriate error message that says, not found. I don't know who person 4 is, right? And of course, if I change this to 3, I get our pastry-loving Irish friend, Joe Bag of Donuts. Now, that's nice. That's an easy way for me to do this interaction, but I want to actually, when I upload that contact, I'm going to pin your question there, the giggles. When I upload the contact, I want to make sure I get a contact. Now, I want to receive a contact. So it's giving me by default, here's what a contact looks like. And it knows that because my post method wants to receive a contact. Now, you might have created an HTML form. You might have created a form in a Xamarin app or in a Web Forms or WPF app. You might have created a form that has all the different fields to make a contact, right? Age, first name, last name. And you want to upload them. There's nothing keeping you from... Wrong key. There's nothing keeping you from taking this and specifying first, last, int age. Nothing keeping you from doing that. You can certainly do that and receive and handle and process and pass on that information. And if you include the from body attribute in front of these, it knows to go look in the body of the request to find parameters with these names, first, last, and age, and put them into these attributes. The route up here of ID grabbed it off the query string and put it into this parameter for us. Well, this attribute is going to say, well, go into the body of the request, find that first object, and whatever value is assigned to it, inject as the first parameter or last parameter or age parameter. This way, right, you can now process and handle. Well, that's what was sent to me. That's what was posted. Well, okay. That's fine, but maybe you want to provide a little bit of value. Maybe you've already got a contact object, a complex object that you want to provide some additional value from. So by specifying this more complex contact object that isn't just a primitive type, it will look for first, last, and age. Find those parameters, bind to those, and make it a contact object that's being passed into our class, into our method. Furthermore, it'll enforce any attributes that we put on these. So let me go back over here and let's paste in a new person here. So let's create a test McTester. There's Irish folks all over the place here, I tell you. And they're age 10 and execute, and you'll see I got a 200 OK. It was successful. If I execute a get to go fetch all of my folks, there's Jeff Fritz, Mary Contrary, Joe Bag of Donuts, and Test McTester. There's my 4 folks. It added them into this. It received, processed, and placed it as a contact. Now, this is a way for us to still work with those complex types. Like I said, you're model binding to it. My post doesn't have any definition for contact here, right? It's just the fields that match it. The fields have the same name, matches up to it, and injects and lines up with it. So this gives you a way to make that interaction programmatically on the server easier. Furthermore, right, we can enforce that range. We can even add required, right? Required parameters to these. Rerun it. And I'm going to grab, Jason, I'm going to grab your question there and grab that. And if I refresh this, let me zoom back out. When we do that post, now that collection was, right, that's an in-memory list, right? I'm back to those 3 folks, right? Jeff, Mary, and Mr. Bag of Donuts. I'm gonna a little formal with Joe. So now if I try this, right? If I don't pass a first name, if I don't pass a last name, and I leave the age empty and execute, because I have API controller decorated on this, I have this attribute decorated on my class. When this method is executed, when it does the model binding here, one of the first things it's going to do is it's going to check the state of that contact. Did any of those attributes fail validation? If it did, return an error. Not just return an error message, a 400 error message, but return information about the errors that those attributes raised for us. The field age must be between 3 and 30. The last field is required. And we can customize those. We know how to customize those, right? By adding a description to these attributes, right? I thought there was a description we could put there, right? I thought there was a message. Yeah, there it is. Error message equals, and I could say something like, last name is required, try again. And I can say error message equals, we only are, we're looking for folks who are at least 3 years old. And rerun that. Refresh. And if I try that post again, post, try it out. And get rid of this, get rid of that, leave that as is. Right now I get the appropriate error messages that I put inside of those attributes, right? It's flowed through all the way from those objects to my interactions in the API. Really, really powerful stuff, and that will be localized for you if you have the localizers wired up. So now, let me pause for a second and come back to the questions that I have here. The first one is from The Giggles. And The Giggles asks, is it better to use the generic ActionResult return type than using IActionResult in Web API? Is this the new convention? I recommend, Jeff Fritz, recommend you use ActionResult of type T because it is more explicit in the types that you're returning for interacting with an open API endpoint and getting the Swagger documentation out of it. It's much cleaner, it's much more descriptive of here's the interactions you can expect, and we'll see more next time about how you can do even more configuring of that and be very explicit about it. I need to get into localization here at some point. I got to put that on the to-do list. I see your question there, SV. S4P0, we got to get there. So I recommend this. IActionResult, I think, is great if you're building MVC controllers and actions where you could be returning a view. You could be returning a JSON result. And it may be different. IActionResult, when you're returning those human interactions, I think you're fine with. But for an API, I would encourage you to use ActionResult, the generic ActionResult of type T. Jason had a question here. There's considerable debate around whether APIs should ever accept entities. It's done a lot for simple examples, but I find in practice it's not a good idea. What are my thoughts? So the example that I'm showing here is clearly, here's the entity I'm putting into the database. That is a very simple, very contrived sample. I'll agree with Jason on that. This is a case where I would receive some sort of a view model. I would prefer to receive some sort of an object that is the hierarchy of data that I expect to receive, not the data structure I expect to persist, right? So I have a view model separate from the data that I'm going to interact with. In this way, I can verify that the data that's been submitted to my API is what I expected. Any parameters that are submitted that are outside of that type are ignored. I don't care. I'm not doing anything with that, right? If I come up here to this, and let's load this back up here. Right, so here I'll put Jason in here. There we go. And Jason's 21, of course. You knew Jason was 21, didn't you? And if I execute that, well, it just added Jason to this. But if we add Jason's evil twin brother, Scott, and we included extra information in here, right? Something else. Execute that. It still works. It still processes. It ignored something else. That's not part of the data that I'm looking at. Don't do anything with that. It's not in my input parameters that are being received here. So now I've got it focused. So only the data that I need, that I want to work with, is present, is being validated, right? That's something else. I don't care what that is. It's been ignored. It hasn't even been sent into this method, right? You can pass whatever gobbledygook that you want, whatever junk, whatever mess. It doesn't matter. It's being ignored. And just the content, just what I expect, has been sent in. So maybe I have a contact view model that doesn't have the ID being passed in and is being added, and the ID is being added when it turns into a contact, when it's being returned. That's okay. That's a way for me to obfuscate and hide data types that are necessary for my data storage mechanisms, but not necessary for how you interact with it as a consumer of the API. I can even rebrand, rename fields so that you can't touch the same fields when you load data, when you send something into my API. So that's a great example there. Let me. Jason has a good follow-up there. Classic case is a user entity which has password information. You don't want to receive a user object being passed in with their password hash, with their encrypted password. No. You're going to receive some information. You're going to receive user with the password they're trying, and you'll go on to the backside APIs where there's a password hash, and you'll test against, and that lives and is stored and configured separately. But the other information about that user, the number of failed login attempts, whether they're locked in, they're locked out of being logged in or not, intruder detection, lockout, that information isn't going to be returned to our API, to our consumers. It's something we're going to manage on the server, and that it's appropriate for our logs, for our administrators to see, but not for the folks that are interacting with my API. I'm going to pin your question there, S4P0, and we'll come back to that. Wells MS asks, would action result of type T not make it harder for unit testing? How would it make it harder for unit testing? I'm receiving an action result I can look at. All right, so, right, if I private void test, right? If this was in another class for unit testing, right? Result equals get by ID 1, right? My result object is an action result of type contact. So I could say result dot value is a contact, and I can say, right, ID equals 1, and do that test appropriately there, and do that inspect. I can also, right, double check, reach into here and say action, right, I could say result is okay object result, right, and do that test and make sure, well, was it returning an okay result? I forget how you get the should have been able to get the I don't know why it isn't there. How to get the status code. There's a way to get the status code back, and I'm blanking on it right now. If I did return that as IActionResult, does that give me the... No, it doesn't give me the status code. Execute result async. I don't want to... So... It is an action result, but I'm blanking here on how to get the status code. Cast it to a status code result. There we go. We can get the status code there. Make sure that it's 200 or whatever. Right. So, you can still unit test. You still can be very successful by inspecting the action result. So... Well, right, you should get, because this is being returned, right, this should be an OK object result, which means that it's going to have a 200 status code. So. No, that's fine here. Wells asks, I thought we should be programming against interfaces. There are times to program against interfaces, and there's times to program against concrete types. The value given to you by returning the concrete type of action result, right? You're still programming against an abstraction. So I think I would clarify here and just adjust your statement there. We should be programming against abstractions, and an abstraction can be either an interface or an abstract class, right? And an action result is an abstract class that wraps a generic object, right? And gives you, right? This is an abstraction. This is a wrapper that gives you those features that you can then interact with, right? That are consumed by many, many different services, as we've already seen, whether it's Swagger, the different return types, the API controller formatting and handling the data being returned properly. So you have different options and facilities by programming against abstractions. Interfaces just happens to be a very popular abstraction to program against. So I think that's you're not far off. I think that's still acceptable. S4P0 asks here, so models should use nullable properties. That's a good question. So let's dig into this a little bit further. In the case of our contact object here, this integer that we're receiving here for age, it's implicitly required because the age is not nullable, right? Remember, if I put a question mark there, that becomes a nullable age. It's no longer required. If I save that, rerun this, put. There it goes. And back over here, if I refresh now and we look at our contact object, you see that the age, it's now allowed to be null. I can create and add somebody here, and they don't need to have an age. Must bind to an object property. I didn't. Okay, so we need... I thought we could get away without it. Still. Must bind to an object property or field on deserialization. That should have... been allowed through because it's nullable. It needs to be a representation of what you expect, but that should have been allowed through. Yeah. That should have been allowed to go through. And it's not even... Oh, wait a sec. Hang on. It's here in the constructor for the contact. This. You don't get this if you're just watching the recording, being able to ask questions and we break things along the way, you know what I'm saying? Post, right? Try it out, and let's try putting Scott back in here. And if we make that null. So that was successful because the age is nullable. You can receive that. So I would go back to the question of, should we make those properties nullable? You should make them nullable if they're optional. Okay? There's times where you want them to be optional. There's times where you don't. In this case, where I'm defining contacts, yeah, maybe I don't need the age. Yeah, the age is there just so it's something that that I want to be able to reference later. I don't know. So that model that you're passing in is okay to be different from what you store. All right. Why am I not reusing .NET Watch Run? I was expecting to bounce between projects more than keep rebuilding the same project. Let me grab that question from, is that Van Buren? Let's see what you did there with that name. Sometimes breaking things is the best way to learn. Yes, Chicken Man. Yes! Let me put up this question from Van Buren because I think this goes a little bit further. If I got models from a database, so table records, let's say table records, should I use view models in my web API in general? I think this is a good practice because it will prevent you from directly taking whatever was submitted by your consumers of your API and putting it directly into the database. It's forcing you to take something from the view model object and put it into the model object. You might use AutoMapper or something like that to generate that. Well, take the view model first name and put it into the data record first name field. But it's forcing you to make that acknowledgement, right? Further, some of the attributes that you may put on your storage objects are going to be different from what you're putting in your view model. Good example, something that I was working on just last week. I'm using Azure Table Storage to store table entities. Well, I don't want to pass Azure Table Storage information in those attributes through my API and into my clients that are interacting with my API. You as a consumer of my API have zero concern that I'm using Azure Table Storage, or maybe I'm using MongoDB or some other database where I've got some different features that are being done inside those objects, right? Some different features I'm taking advantage of to move data around. Row version, partition key and row key in Azure Table Storage. These things, you as a consumer, you don't care about. And I don't want to have to require you to use the Azure Table Storage NuGet packages to get a reference to my business objects that you're interacting with. So by creating this, now I can say, all right, I'm just receiving those strings. I put the validation into my APIs for interaction. right? And right, I've got these validations here for what you're passing in, and I can still have somewhere over here my contact table entity object that is an Azure table entity, right? I'm not going to do the entire reference, and right, I'm going to right, have a public string right, first name field here, right, get, I'm going to return right, a first name property that might be out here, private string first name, right? I have that hanging out here, but I'm also going to say inside of this, I would say partition key equals value the 0 with character, and I'm also going to say first name equals value, right? I've done extra work here that your object, your interaction doesn't care about. But when I go to return data, I'm going to cast it. I'm going to convert it from a contact table entity that I'm storing. That shouldn't be contact table entity. It should be just table entity. I'm going to cast it back to that contact object. And when I receive a contact object and put it into Azure storage, well, I'm going to copy what's in the first field here, put it into first name, and it's going to generate my partition key for me. And right, I might also have right int ID, right, and get is going to be int on base dot row key, set base dot row key equals value to string, because the row key and partition key in Azure table storage are strings. So right, I'm storing it in a different field. I've put it somewhere else, and I'm interacting with it. And once again, the consumer doesn't care about it. It's being stored and managed appropriately for my storage mechanism somewhere else. You'd have to touch the client if you swap your backend storage in that case. Exactly, Robert Tables. If I change this from storing in Azure Table Storage to MongoDB, now I gotta update all the clients. And trust me, they don't care what data storage you're using. You don't want to deploy those updates. You don't want to deploy those references where you're deploying now MongoDB libraries onto folks' workstations or mobile apps or what have you. Receive that data and keep that concern about how you're storing data on the server. They don't need to know about it that are consuming your APIs. All right. I'm going to remove this, right, this sample that I conjectured here. Now, the last piece that I want to talk about in the last 12 minutes I think we have here, the last sample to talk about is content formatting. Now, by default, ASP.NET Core really knows how to handle JSON well. Now I'm going to do that .NET Watch run. This knows how to do JSON so well. Right, so I have my contact controller, and it knows how to interact with first, last, and the age, and that's great. I will refresh, but I can also interact. By default, it does JSON. I mentioned that, but I can also interact and have it return XML format. Out of the box, it knows how to format and handle XML. So you can add where it says add controllers, and we're going to get into these two in a minute. I can say, you also know how to format XML if somebody asks for XML. So let me go back over here to my Swagger API. So if somebody does a get, well, now Swagger knows how to change this and say, well, I can return XML too. Execute that, and now instead of returning JSON, because it's sent in an accept header that says application XML, now we're returning XML. All of my business logic, all of my code is the same. This is a formatter that ASP.NET Core is applying to format your data. And it works in both directions, not just output, but input as well. If I want to load XML shaped data into my API, you can do that. You can receive that. By adding those XML serializers, you've now told the world, I know how to accept and interact with this MIME type, with this content type, working with my data. Now, JSON and XML are two of the most common formats that folks use for interacting with this. But there's nothing saying that you couldn't write your own format. Maybe you want to be able to output CSV and allow folks to get your contact list as a CSV, right? A comma-separated value list. Then they can load it into Excel or a Google Doc or a Open Office spreadsheet and be able to work with that data because they got data and it's in a format that works nicely with those applications. Sure. Those are additional formatters that you can write. Actually, I think there might be one on NuGet for that, for CSV formatting. There we go. You can download and add a formatter to output as CSV, right? This is Web API contrib from Damian Bowden. Where is it? Show me where you're adding the reference. Here we go. Add CSV formatters. And it will allow you to handle text CSV, right? Heck, let's add this. Let's do this. Let's do this right now. I'm feeling like taking a little bit of a risk. Why not? Let's go off the rails. And we'll show this one that does vCard formatting. So I'm going to add in a package reference. There it is for Web API contrib formatters CSV. I'll save that. It's going to rebuild to include that. And what I'll be able to do here is... come on, where was it? Add CSV serializer formatters. There's a using statement. There it is. Save. And now, right, I'll go back over to my Swagger UI. Refresh. If I go to get contacts, now text CSV is in my list. There's the new accept header that I can submit. Now I get CSV data. All right, it's separated with semicolons instead of commas. Is there a configuration option I missed there? There's got to be a configuration option there. There's a CSV options. Let me see, what do we got here? New CSV formatter options. What do we got? Because I want, yeah, delimiter, right? Is that going to be something like this? What's the CSV delimiter? It's a string. Okay, fine. Huh. Is there anything about headers? Include Excel delimiter header. Use single line header in CSV. Yes, let's put that in there too. Save that, let it rebuild, and we'll rerun this. Refresh one more time, get the data, try it out. I want CSV. There we go. I get commas and I get a header row. Nice, right? I haven't changed anything in my code. It still works. All I've done is add formatters. Consider one of the examples that they always use here for us is, well, maybe you want an image. Maybe you want to get the profile picture for one of these contacts. Well, you can set up a formatter that says, well, okay, here's how to go get, when somebody requests, an image PNG. These are custom formats that you can apply to inspect and interact with your data. So typical text format that they suggest in the documentation is vCards, right? So you have contacts that you might keep in Microsoft Outlook or in other mail applications. You have a vCard that's that business card of information for the various folks to interact. So you implement either a text input formatter to receive a vCard or a text output formatter to output in vCard format, and you see it adds an appropriate media type for what it's returning. It inspects and says, well, these are the types that you can return this type for. Contact, we know how to do that. And we're going to write out the body using this format vCard to add a name, first name, and a user ID. And these are fields that we have. And there's other fields in the vCard specification, like phone number and email and other things. But this is intended to be a simple example. So by taking that and going back into startup and adding these formatters into my definition of my application, once again, my contact controller is still the same, does all the same things. It's rebuilt. I'll go back over here to Swagger, refresh. If I do a get on the context, now I get text vCard. Try it out, execute, and now I get, there's the first vCard, Jeff Fritz. And I could load that into, right, if that was saved out as a vCard, I could load that into Outlook, whatever email application, right? And there's my contacts loaded in, and it knows how to interact with them. So lots of flexibility, and because I have input formatters, I can take a vCard out of Outlook, right? You have that card that you have saved that has that person you met at a conference one time. You can export that into a vCard format on disk and upload it into the API, and it knows how to parse that apart into a contact object and store it in the database, right? Because it knows how to turn a vCard into a contact. That's pretty powerful stuff. What you can do with these APIs, because you as the business logic don't have to be concerned with handling formatting, managing the comma separation and all the little things in how the data format is handled. It's being done by the formatter, and your business logic stays clean. That's great stuff. Oh my gosh. That's one of the reasons I really like the APIs and the flexibility of APIs with ASP.NET Core. All the source code for today's session is available out on the GitHub repository. I want to make sure that you have that exclamation point GitHub in the Twitch chat room if you're watching there. If you're watching the recording, check the link just below for the link to C# with CSharpFritz. Check into sessions. This is in season 2, and you will find this. This is going to be 0204 API Part 1. All the samples that we worked through are in that folder. You can check them out. Download them to your machine, whether you're on Windows, Mac, or Linux. Have that .NET 5 SDK installed, and you can test them out and have a good time learning about all the topics we hit here today. But we're about out of time. We are right at the edge of today's episode, right at the end of it, and it's time to say goodbye. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate you joining me. This was a fantastic session going through. I really liked all the questions today. I will be back, of course, next Monday with another C# with CSharpFritz session. We'll be talking about Swagger and gRPC next time, going further on our APIs. If you're over there on Learn TV, I hope you have a great day. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. Keep an eye here next week, Monday, 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific, 1300 UTC, for our next live streaming episode.